So this is the Talmud Daf Yomi. We're in Avodah Daf 70. So at the end of 69, it says, Rava says, in the case of a Gentile prostitute, where Jews are dining at her table, the wine at the table is permitted. Granted, their passion for the sin of harlotry overwhelms their judgment. Now we're in 70. But the passion for wine used for libation does not overwhelm their judgment, and they will not allow her to use it for a libation. So in the case of a Jewish prostitute and Gentiles dining with her, the wine is forbidden. What is the reason? It is that since she is contemptible in their eyes, she is subjugated to them, and they use the wine for a libation without consideration for her. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain house where Jews' wine was stored. A Gentile entered the house, and he locked the door before the Jew. But there was a crack in the door, and the Gentile was found standing between the barrels. So Rava said, all the barrels that were opposite the crack through which the Gentile could be seen are permitted, because he would have been weary about being seen tampering with them. Barrels on this side and that side of the crack, where the Gentile could not be seen, are forbidden, as perhaps the Gentile used them for a libation. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain Jew's wine that was stored in the lower story of a house, in which the Jew was living in the upper story, and a Gentile in the lower story, and the wine could be supervised from the upper story. One day the residents heard a sound of quarreling and went outside. The Gentile came back in first and locked the door before the Jew. So Rava said the wine is permitted because the Gentile presumably said to himself, just as I came back in early, perhaps my neighbor, the Jew, came back in early and is sitting in the upper story and watching me, and therefore he would not use the wine for a libation. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain inn where a Jew's wine was stored and a Gentile was found sitting among the barrels. Rava said, if he was caught as a thief, that is, if the Gentile seemed startled and did not have a good explanation for being there, the wine is permitted, as the Gentile was presumably afraid about being caught and would not have used it for a libation. But if not, the wine is forbidden. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain house where wine was stored. A Gentile was found standing among the barrels. Rava said, if he has a way to excuse his entrance to where the wine was stored, the wine is forbidden. But if not, the wine is permitted. So the Gemara raises an objection to this ruling from a Braita. If an inn was locked and a Gentile was inside, or if the Jew said to the Gentile, safeguard my wine, the wine is forbidden. What is it not forbidden, even if the Gentile does not have a way to excuse his entrance? The Gemara answers no. The Braita is referring to a situation where he does have a way to excuse his entrance, otherwise the wine is permitted. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain Jew and a certain Gentile who were sitting and drinking wine. The Jew heard the sound of praying at the synagogue. He got up and went to pray. Rava said the wine is permitted because the Gentile presumably said to himself, any moment now he will remember his wine and come back. So the Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain Jew and a certain Gentile who were sitting on a ship. The Jew heard the sound of the shofar of twilight, indicating the beginning of Shabbat. He disembarked and went into town to spend Shabbat there. Rava said the wine is permitted because the Gentile presumably said to himself, any moment now he will return his wine and come back. He will remember his wine and come back. So the Gemara comments, and if one might object that the Gentile was presumably not concerned because he knows that the Jew will not return until the end of Shabbat, didn't Rava say, Isor the convert told me, when we were still Gentiles before converting, we used to say, Jews do not actually observe Shabbat. As if they observed Shabbat, how many wallets would be found in the marketplace that the Jews could not take on Shabbat? And I did not know that we maintain that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak, as Rabbi Yitzchak says, one who finds a wallet on Shabbat may carry it in increments of less than 4 cubits. So evidently, Gentiles assume that a Jew would violate Shabbat for monetary gain. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain lion who roared in a wine press. The Gentile heard the roar and was frightened, and he hid among the barrels of wine. Rava said the wine is permitted because the Gentile presumably said to himself, just as I am hiding, a Jew might also be hiding behind me and see me. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving certain thieves who came to Pumbedita and opened many barrels of wine. So Rava said the wine is permitted. What is the reason? Most of the thieves in Pumbedita are Jews, and the halacha follows the majority. Therefore, the wine is not rendered forbidden. There was a similar incident in Avodah, and Shmuel said the wine is permitted. The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is this? Perhaps it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says, with regard to cases of uncertainty concerning ritual purity, that if the uncertainty is with regard to a person's entry into a certain place, he is deemed pure. So this is, as we learned in a Mishnah, Taharot 6.5, with regard to one who enters into a valley during the rainy season, that is winter when people generally do not enter this area, there was a ritual impurity in such and such a field, and he said, I know I walked to that place, that is, I walked in the valley, but I do not know whether I entered that field where the ritual impurity was or whether I did not enter. So Rabbi Eliezer says, in a case of uncertainty with regard to entry, it is uncertain whether he entered the area where the ritual impurity is located. He is ritually pure. But if he certainly entered the area where the ritual impurity is located and the uncertainty pertains to contact with the source of purity, he is ritually impure. And so apparently the ruling of Shmuel, that in a case where it is uncertain whether the Gentile thieves entered the house at all, the wine is permitted, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara rejects this. No, it is different there with regard to the wine barrels, since there are thieves who open barrels for the sake of perhaps finding money in them and are not interested in wine. It is the case of compound uncertainty, as it is uncertain whether the thieves were Gentiles or Jews, and even if they were Gentiles, it is uncertain whether or not they touched the wine. In a case of compound uncertainty, everyone agrees that the wine is not forbidden. The Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain Gentile girl who was found among the barrels, and she was holding wine froth in her hand. So Rava said the wine is permitted, as it is reasonable to say that she took it from the outside of the barrel and not from the inside barrel. And even if there is no more of the froth on the outside of the barrel, it is reasonable to say that she happened upon the froth while it was still there, even though it is no longer there. So the Gemara relates, there was an incident involving a certain army that entered Nahardea and opened many barrels of wine. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said there was a similar incident that was brought before Rabbi Elazar, and he deemed the wine permitted. But I do not know whether he permitted it because he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says concerning uncertainty with regard to entry, the person or item is ritually pure, or whether he permitted it because he maintains that most of those who went with that army were Jews. That although it was a Gentile army, the auxiliaries were mostly Jews. So the Gemara asks, if that is so, if he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, why did he permit the wine? Is it a case of uncertainty with regard to entry? It is clear that the auxiliaries came and opened the barrels, so it is a case of uncertainty with regard to contact, whether they touched the wine or not, and Rabbi Eliezer agrees that such a case is treated stringently. So the Gemara answers, since they opened many barrels, it is reasonable to say that they opened the barrels only with the intention of finding money and had no interest in the wine itself, and therefore it is similar to a case of uncertainty with regard to entry. The Gemara relates there was an incident involving a certain female owner of a wine shop who transferred the key to the door of her wine shop to a Gentile woman. So Rabbi Yitzchak said that Rabbi Elazar said there was a certain incident that was brought before the sages in the study hall, and they said she transferred to her the responsibility for safeguarding the key alone, but did not authorize her to enter the tavern, so there is no concern that she entered there. Abai said, we learned this halacha in a Mishnah as well. Taharot 7:1. In the case of one who transferred keys to one who is unreliable with regard to ritual impurity, so Am Haaretz, even though the contact with an Am Haaretz renders pure items impure, his pure items are for safeguarding the key alone and did not authorize him to enter. I'm sorry, I'm skipping a line. Yeah, his pure items are pure because they are transferred to the Haaretz, the responsibility for safeguarding the key alone, and did not authorize him to enter. Now that the Mishnah has determined that his pure items are pure, is it necessary to state that this principle with regard to the halachot of wine used for libation? So the Gemara asks with regard to Abaye's reasoning, is this to say that the halacha or the halachot of ritually impure items are more stringent than those concerning wine used for libation? The Gemara answers, indeed, that is so, as it is stated that there was a dispute with regard to a courtyard where owners divided among themselves with a low partition. So Rav says, if one's neighbor on the other side of the partition is an haaretz, one's pure items that he leaves in the courtyard are rendered impure. But in the case of a Gentile neighbor, this does not render his wine an idolatrous libation. And Rabbi Yochanan says his pure items remain pure as well. Evidently, Rav considers the halachot of purity more stringent than those of wine used for libation. The Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Rav from a Braita. If the inner courtyard belongs to a chaver, so one devoted to the meticulous observance of mitzvot, especially the halachot of ritual purity, teruma and tithes, and the outer courtyard to an haaretz, that chaver may lay out his produce there in the inner courtyard and place his vessels there without concern about the haaretz. And this applies even if the hand of the haaretz can reach there. So this poses a difficulty to the opinion of Rav, who holds that even in a situation where there is a partition, there is a concern about the contact with an haaretz. So the Gemara answers that Rav could have said to you, it is different there as with regard to haaretz. To tamper with the produce, he could be caught and accused as a thief, as he has no business being in the inner courtyard. Therefore, there is no concern that he will tamper with it. The Gemara suggests, come in here, support for Rav's opinion from Braita, so Tosefta and Taharot 9:11. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says if the roof of a chaver is above the roof of his neighbor, who is nam haaretz, that chaver may lay out produce there and place vessels there, provided that the hand of the haaretz cannot reach there. But if it is within the reach, the pure items of the chaver are rendered impure. This poses a difficulty to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who deems permitted pure items in a courtyard divided by a low partition. Okay, so the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan could have said to you, it is different there as were the haaretz to be discovered, reaching up to the upper roof. He has a way to excuse his behavior by saying, I merely stretch myself. I am not intending to tamper with anything. So come in here, that which is taught in that similar Braita. If the roof of the chaver is beside the roof of the haaretz, that chaver may lay out produce there and place vessels there, even if hand of the haaretz can be reached there. This poses a difficulty to the statement of Rav. So the Gemara answers that Rav could have said to you, isn't there the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which stands in accordance with the opinion, with my opinion, with regard to proofs that are next? I gotta say this again. So the Gemara answers that Rav could have said to you, isn't there the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which stands in accordance with my opinion with regard to the roofs that are next to one another? So what I say is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, in the case of a military unit or a boleshet that entered a city, if it entered during peacetime, then after the soldiers leave, the open barrels of wine are forbidden, but the sealed barrels are permitted. If the unit entered in wartime, both these barrels and those barrels are permitted, because in wartime there is no time to pour wine for libations, and one can be certain that the soldiers did not do so. That is the end of DOF 70.